slowed even more. I had enough time to stab it through the thinner armor at its throat 3 times before its stinger swung down again. This time, evading it was much easier. I had dealt the animal a lot of damage, and it visibly stumbled. I don't know what happened. One moment I was happily attacking the bug demon, confident of chipping away its life one pathetic stab at a time while it stood, held still by my talent for slowing time. And then, somehow, I was on my back with the damn thing looming over me and time returning to normal. "Caleb!" April said. I was stunned. The creature moved closer, its pincers clicking together above me as it sought for its prey. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The demon had dealt me a terrible blow. Thankfully, my jacket and the cushions tied to me had softened my landing, but pain still coursed through my ribs. "Get up, you idiot," I said to myself. At the same time, I tried to focus, tried to slow time again, but the monster was right on top of me. Even blinded, it knew where I was, and for the second time since the time rift had let it through into our world, the horrible scorpion thing bore down on me. I gritted my teeth and strove with everything I had to keep its pincers away from my face. Once more, I thought I was done for. I couldn't see how I could survive, how I could keep the vile creature away. Its strength was monstrous. For how long I could have continued to struggle, I didn't know. All I knew was that I was a heartbeat from despair, a heartbeat from giving up hope, when the van door opened up next to my head and April emerged. Still wrapped in cushions, she wielded the tire iron at the demon and spat curses at the demon. The sight of her screaming like a warrior stepping out of a history book jolted me back to life, and her first attack with that heavy piece of metal did the trick. The demon staggered off me with a screech that hurt my ears. I sat up, then stood. The demon lunged. It couldn't see, but its aim was true. I shoved April roughly out of the way and drove my scissors deep into the monster's obscene-looking face. It reeled back, screaming and writhing in agony. Maybe my scissors were a better weapon than I'd given them credit for. Then April was there, bashing it with her tire iron. I had abandoned the scissors in the creature's flesh, but I slowed time again, focusing my talent on the demon itself, affecting it and nothing more. If I'd done that to a person, they would have practically stopped. But the bug demon's resistance remained true. It slowed, but only a little. Hopefully, it was enough. "Cut its head off!" Shell called from inside the van. "With what?" I yelled. We didn't have anything with that kind of cutting power. Before the AI could answer, I spotted one of the dead demon's claws. It had been wrenched off in the fight. I grabbed it and turned back to the scorpion before it could turn its attention to April. The claw sliced through the monster's flesh like a cleaver through jelly. More of the insect's gross innards splashed over my arms and face. This time, the burning didn't bother me as I hacked at the demon's neck. April saw what I was doing. With a look of fury Bruce Banner might have been proud of, she jumped on top of the demon, straddling it, and drove the tire iron into the other side of its neck, punctuating her strikes with grunts of sheer effort. The sight of her atop that monster with her hair flying around her face and her hands covered in bug goo was something that would stick with me until the end of time. I knew right then that I was in love. Working together, we finally brought the demon down. It fought until the last tendrils of flesh were severed. When the head rolled onto the concrete, I helped April away from it and we sank, exhausted, into the van. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes," she answered, grinning broadly. "You?" "Never better." "Wow," June said softly. I didn't know if she was legitimately impressed or if she was making a sarcastic noise in response to the tenderness she might have seen between April and me. Nor at that moment did I care. "Well, that wasn't so hard, was it?" the wizard asked. I sat up. He had reappeared, arms and all, sitting in the cockpit at the front of the van. Chapter 9. My response at seeing the old man was complex. Relief featured heavily because his presence meant we could go home. But there was also a healthy dose of resentment, and if I'd been less shattered by yet another near-death experience, I would have been angry as well. I have a few questions, I said, then decided I was too tired to sit, so I flopped back down on the floor of the Bedford. April was lying beside me, looking equally spent. We were both covered in bug guts that soaked our cushions, clothes, and hair. Despite the gore and the stink, I still thought she was the hottest woman I'd ever met. I have more than a few fucking questions, June spat. She was sitting against the van wall with her foot propped up on a cushion. What the hell is going on, old man? Start explaining. Wait, you know what? I don't care. Just take us home. Now. The wizard favored her with his casual grin. Before we talk about that, the wizard said, let's assess where we started and where we've gone. I don't see, June began. The wizard held up a hand to stop her and nodded to the floating AI. Shell? Shell glowed purple instead of white for a moment, and then holographic screens appeared in the air and filled up with glowing text. April and I hauled ourselves back up once again. As the AI started to speak, I pulled the cushions off my body, and April did the same. Gross yellow ooze stuck to each of us in strings. You have both learned that you are stronger working together than you are apart. What? So this was all just a team-building exercise? I asked, pausing briefly. At this, the old wizard uttered a snort of a laugh. In no way, lad. In no way. The point is, neither of you would be alive if you hadn't helped each other, Shell continued. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, April said, sounding tired. But it does take a genius to assess whether or not the timelines have been straightened out. And I am happy to report that by destroying the minor demons in this area, you have quelled the tide of incursions. For now. For now? I asked. Shell is correct, the wizard said. As usual. There are more minor demons out there, and of course there is the major demon as well. I hadn't seen where he'd pulled it from, but somehow he had another bottle of bourbon in his hand. Perhaps it had materialized with him. As he finished speaking, he took a swig any seasoned practicing alcoholic would have been proud of. I tossed the last of the ruined cushions outside the van. They made a disgusting pile next to the dead insects. I could use a drink, I said. He held the bottle away from my outstretched hand. Go find your own damn liquor. Shell, that assessment, if you will. Your ratings, Shell announced. A holographic screen appeared in front of April, June, and myself. Despite myself, I was curious, and I could see that April was as well. June, not so much. It was like a character sheet from a video game. Most of the information displayed was stuff I already knew. Name, age, description, etc. It was only near the bottom that things got interesting. There were categories like strength, 12, speed, 6, wisdom, 8, and luck, 8. I wondered if the speed figure was low due to my leg. In addition, it had a health bar. Happily, mine was still green and about 90%. I figured all I needed to do was eat a few blocks of cheese or swallow a health potion and I'd be back to 100% in no time. There was also an item I didn't understand. Augmenters. 2. Times 1.0 augmentation. I didn't know what an augmenter was, but if I was reading it right, apparently I had 2 of them. And the figure in brackets, was that some sort of multiplier? I could have asked, but there was something even more interesting. At the bottom of the holograph, under a heading called Atypical Skill, was this. Time bending, 1. Time bending? I murmured out loud. Would you prefer to call it something else? Shell asked. No, I said. Time bending was as good a description for my talent as any, I thought. It was just that until then, it had been my secret. What does the 1 signify? I asked. It is your rating, power level, if you will, on a scale of 1 to 10. I didn't find the idea flattering. And I rate only a 1? How do I rate only a 1 out of 10? I asked.
You fought only one tiny insectoid, Shell responded. And you would not have survived if April hadn't assisted. Given your potential, how could you rate more?
I didn't know what she meant by my potential, and I didn't ask. 2 bug demons, I corrected. And both at once. That should count for something. She didn't budge.
The ratings are only to help you see what your power is. They are estimates of how much damage you can inflict and endure during battle.
I looked at my bum leg. Trust me, I can endure plenty during battle.
Ha! The wizard said. That's what you think. But we aren't talking about guns and bullets here. You should have been able to freeze the demons in their timelines completely. Long enough to kill them without worrying about being eaten. But do not worry, my friend, that skill will come.
His eyes twinkled as he looked from me to the girls. June rolled her eyes.
Look, this is all wildly entertaining, but can we just leave now?
The wizard shook his head.
Not yet. Not with those other insects out there. We have to stop them. If we don't, it could trigger the end times, he said.
It was a sobering thought. I couldn't help glance at the dead demons outside. Could their actions really lead to the end of the whole universe?
We didn't sign up for this,
June said. The wizard ignored her.
Are you excited, young Caleb? He asked. You feel it, don't you? The ebb and flow of time, the way it moves around everything. This is what you're meant to do, isn't it? This whole gig, tracking down time demons and giving them hell? You were born for this.
I feel like shit, actually, I said. I didn't want the wizard to know how right he was. As he spoke, it was like he was awakening something long hidden within me. I could feel something deep in my psyche resonate with him, something deeper than the universe itself. It was inexplicable. Was it a sense of destiny, maybe? What was destiny if not time? And yet, that wasn't the only thing going through my mind right at the moment. Remembering what had happened during the fight, I turned to April. How were you able to talk to me out there after I lost my transmitter? April blushed.
I don't know for sure.
The old man snorted.
Liar.
April shot him a dirty look. You do know, don't you? I asked. Instead of answering, she deflected the question.
How were you able to slow down those demons?
I shrugged, then grinned. I don't know for sure.
You have something in your teeth, the wizard pointed out. Just there. Looks like bug guts.
I quickly shut my mouth and then spit out the door. June had been quietly seething through the entire conversation, but now she spoke up again.
Why won't you take us home? In case you hadn't noticed, I need medical attention.
The wizard moved out of his cockpit and shuffled over to June's side, and with one hand still clutching his bottle of bourbon, gently lifted June's leg. The dark-haired twin looked about ready to deck him. To my surprise, she gasped instead.
What are you doing?
April asked, moving closer, hovering over her sister protectively. Nor was she the only one. In my mind, the wizard was an untrustworthy old man whose motives were suspect, and I felt surprisingly possessive toward both sisters. Touching June's swollen ankle, the wizard began chanting. A faint blue glow emanated from her skin, and the air began to tingle as it did before a storm.
That tickles,
June said, sounding uncertain. The wizard stopped chanting and removed his hand. The swelling and bruising had disappeared. June moved her foot around, testing it.
It doesn't hurt anymore. What did you do?
The way she said it, it was almost an accusation. The old man gave a grunt and took another swig from his bottle.
Localized time shift, he said. Took your ankle back to a time before it was sprained. It never happened, my dear.
Wow, I said. I was impressed despite myself. At the same time, I was trying very hard not to look at June's beautiful legs, which had become exposed when her dress slid upward. How? I began.
It's just something I picked up over the years. Well, millennia, actually.
The wizard made his way back to the driver's seat, and June gingerly stood in the back of the van, testing her ankle. Millennia? How old are you then? I asked.
Old enough to know that some things don't need to be told until their time,
the old man said as he settled himself into his cockpit. I snorted. Ridiculous.
Is it?
His bushy eyebrows shot into the hair flying over his forehead.
You've never withheld information because it wasn't the right timing.
I scratched my face. Stubble had grown on my chin and drying bug goo peeled off. Of course I have. But we just defeated the demons. Don't we deserve to know something?
How about a hot shower instead? The wizard asked.
As long as it's in our apartment, June said.
Nope, not yet,
the wizard said. I was getting annoyed. Look, you can't just keep us here against our will. It's called kidnapping where I come from, I said. We have lives to get back to. The old man looked at me with a remarkably sober expression given the rate he was drinking his bourbon.
Do you really want to go back there? To the Good Times Club, in 2019 or whenever it was? There's an open rift there, in case you had forgotten, not to mention an enormous time demon. Oh, and let's not forget Eddie, shall we? The police will be wanting to investigate. That's if the feds haven't already showed up to quarantine the area.
He made a good point. I have classes, I muttered weakly.
Ah, yes, the pursuit of higher knowledge, a noble calling. Tell me, Caleb, have those classes shed any light on your abilities?
You seem to know an awful lot about me, I noted. His eyes twinkled mischievously.
You have no idea.
He looked around at the three of us, then nodded.
A hot shower it is. Shall we get to it then?
Chapter 10. As if it was a signal, the various displays Shell was showing faded away. At the same time, the door closed all by itself, and the old man yanked the lever down on the van. We went hurtling through time once again. It was just as before, with the three of us in the back bouncing around and the old man laughing maniacally in front. But this time, when we stopped, the world outside looked gray and nebulous.
Where are we?
April asked.
We're going to get some rest, and then I will give you your next mission,
the wizard said, proving once again that he really was very bad at answering questions.
Are you deaf as well as crazy? June demanded. We are not going with you. We're going home.
April reached an arm around June's waist. The move was sisterly, protective, but I couldn't help remembering the way the twins had danced on stage earlier that night. Now that we were out of danger, my mind was drifting to places it shouldn't go, filled with the entertaining possibilities. Yet I wasn't exactly well placed to do anything about it. Covering myself in bug juice didn't strike me as a surefire way to win a woman's heart, after all. The wizard turned back around.
Look, I need your help. There are things going on that you simply don't yet understand. Going back to the Good Times Club isn't really an option, and I'm tired. For much of today, I didn't exist. So tonight, I'm going to rest, which means you are too, okay?
We didn't argue, but I would have liked to rest in my own bed in the privacy of my apartment where I could stop my head from spinning. Yet it didn't seem to be an option. I sighed out loud. These cushions aren't exactly the recipe for a good night's sleep, I said.
And I'm not sleeping anywhere near you, June shot at the old man. Well then, the wizard said as casually as ever. We'll have to fix that, won't we?
He looked at the floating AI, which had been largely silent since the old man had returned.
I'm thinking a Greek palace, yes? Complete with columns, soft linens, giant baths, and salty sea air. What do you say?
Why not just wish for your own private island? I joked.
We can do that,
Shell said. And incredibly, as soon as she finished speaking, the Bedford began to change. 1 minute we were crammed into the back, sliding around on cushions. The next, the walls pushed outward and the ceiling grew taller. With a thump, the wheels fell off and the van landed on something solid beneath us. The driver's cockpit became hidden by sheer luxurious curtains, and everywhere I looked, the van was morphing. Elegant Ionian columns sprang from the van's metal frame. The floors turned to marble, and calming yellow light filled the space. "I'll be damned," I said. It was incredible, unbelievable, TARDIS level amazing, and then some. Instead of the van, we were now inside what looked like a Greek villa, or at least pictures of some I had seen. I had never been in one. There was only one real room, but what a room! A large bed sat in one corner, draped by more sheer curtains that hung from the ceiling in cascades. A pool-sized bath steamed in the opposite corner, fed by a fountain at one end. The smell of sand and salt filled the air, and I rushed to the high windows on one side and looked out. Sure enough, a blue sea had replaced the forest. "Is this the Mediterranean?" I asked.
But we haven't moved, right?
April asked. She came up beside me, her expression echoing my own astonishment as she closed her eyes and breathed in the sea air.
"Isn't it romantic?" the wizard asked.
"It really is,"
Shell replied.
"I've outdone myself this time."
"But you got it all from my head," the wizard said. "Speaking of head, there's lots of room here, but not too much, you see. We'll all be perfectly comfortable, of course."
June was staring at the bed.
"You couldn't have summoned multiple beds?"
"What would be the fun in that, my dear?"
The wizard ran with surprising nimbleness for one so old over to the bed and tossed himself onto the white sheets.
"This is perfect."
I couldn't help but think of him outside the Good Times Club, where he'd walked with the aid of a knobbly old staff. Maybe the staff had been just for show. He didn't appear to need it. April was staring at him with a disgusted look on her face. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll sleep on the floor."
"But there's plenty of room,"
Shell said.
"Yes," the wizard agreed. "Plenty of room for whatever your imagination can conjure. And I bet you have loads of ideas."
He grinned at me. I was starting to get the idea that the old man was a bigger pervert than I'd thought, but he wasn't wrong. The notion of spending the night with the girls would be like a fantasy come true, and it sent my heart racing. Of course, there wasn't any privacy, so nothing would happen. "I'm bone tired," I said, trying to deflect. But as soon as I said it, though, I realized my mistake. The wizard guffawed.
"Bone! Did you hear that, Shell? Bone!"
He sat up on the edge of the bed and offered a half bow to June.
"His bone is tired, my lady, but I bet he could find enough energy for one more go. Or is it two?"
He laughed crazily. April just shook her head and June scowled at him. The dark-haired twin grabbed her sister's hand and stalked to the bathtub. I'd already seen the women naked, but I wasn't about to let the old man get that satisfaction, so I pulled the curtains closed around the pool behind them. Even though they were sheer, they would give April and June at least the illusion of having their own space. Then I turned my back, crossing my arms over my chest like I was their bodyguard. The wizard waved me off.
"You're so close, Caleb. Don't you want to peek? You don't have to worry about me. I have my own at home."
"Your own what?" He winked.
"Wouldn't you like to know?"
Shaking my head, I uncrossed my arms. "Where is your home?"
"Here and there. A long ways away. Come on, while they're freshening up, I'll give you a tour."
"I thought there was just this one room."
"Not a tour of this, but of my mind."
"Now, that's something I'm not sure I want to see."
"Trust me, you'll want to see this."
Despite my best intentions, the wizard led me back to the cockpit. I couldn't help but glance at the bathing pool area, and I saw both women were naked. The sheer curtains only tantalized me, showing off the girls' perfect forms in an unconsciously sensuous display that was better than any seedy stage. As I turned away, I tried to discreetly adjust myself. The wizard giggled as if at some private joke. Then he motioned me into the driver's capsule. It was the only thing about the van that had stayed as it was.
Now, you've got questions, I've got answers. You'll find everything you need to know here. Of course, some of it is locked away for your own good, but I figure much of my knowledge is safe for you to know now.
The older man grinned very broadly.
First, and most important, you are just at the start. That 1 out of 10 rating was no joke. From here on, you will continue to gain power, and so will the girls.
Just like that, the old man had gained my full attention. I had a million questions, most of which revolved around how he seemed to know so much about me, April, and June. The girls? I asked. The old man gave a knowing grin.
Yes, surely you've noticed they are different.
I had. Well, yeah. That thing with April, she can communicate telepathically? The wizard nodded.
And June?
I'm not as sure about her, but I can sense her feelings somehow, like she can project her strongest emotions.
Good, exactly right. And it will get better with time.
A day ago, I was working at my job as a bouncer in a strip club, and the only peculiar thing in my life was my minor talent for slowing down time. Since then, I'd faced down enormous bug monsters from another dimension, traveled through time in an aging Bedford van, and watched that Bedford van transform into a luxurious exotic apartment. I'd also seen the old man fade into non-existence only to reappear, had several discussions with a floating AI, and have been in telepathic conversation with April. Because of all this, I was more than able to believe dozens of impossible things before breakfast. I didn't even bat an eye. Do they know? I asked.
They are only just beginning to understand their own abilities.
The wizard winked.
And you are the key to unlocking them, and just as they are the keys to unlocking yours.
I rolled my eyes, not at the words so much as at his delivery. Was everything a dirty joke with him? I mean, the girls were beautiful, smart, courageous, and had the best bodies I'd ever seen. But I didn't want to think about sex with them at every waking moment. I was bound to become uncomfortable. The wizard had a wicked grin plastered across his face.
Hard, isn't it?
What's hard? He cleared his throat. I adjusted myself again. Suddenly my pants had become too tight. I shook my head, thinking about the near-death experiences that night. Those memories would surely dampen my mood. To the contrary, I found myself more aroused than ever when I remembered the way April had ridden that minor demon, beating it with her tire iron. She had been incredible. Damn it, old man! What do you have to show me?
Loads!
I swear, he made everything sound perverted. Chapter 11.
Shell, get your shiny middle ass over here, the old man commanded.
Obediently, the floating, egg-shaped AI did as he asked.
It's time, said the wizard. Give young Caleb here the information he needs to know, but keep it short. Cliff Notes version should do the trick.
Shell had no face, no ability to convey expression at all, and yet I got the distinct impression she was happy to accept the old man's will. And with that, the AI started to speak.
The universe we live in is not singular. Instead, it is one of an infinite number of universes, a vast, ever-moving, ever-changing sea of universes, all with their own rules, their own worlds, and their own physical laws.
It was a theory I'd heard before, but Shell made it much more real by projecting a holographic image that somehow conveyed it clearly. It was a dazzling display in perfect color, and it was majestic to behold. A total perspective vortex and then some, because it managed to convey the multiverse in its entirety. It made me feel very small indeed.
Within this multiverse, there are millions of time streams at once. Some of those time streams are within our grasp, others are not. The timelines are fickle, but not without rules.
The images changed and warped, showing me through 1,000 different universes at once, and all along the timelines. I caught glimpses of the beginning of everything, all the way through to the end of time itself. Dinosaurs changed places with alien life forms and enormous cities that had never existed. In our timeline, at least. It was incredible, inspiring, magnificent. And yet, also as scary as hell. For as I watched, drawn in completely, I saw the bug demons in their own inimical universe, and knew true horror. They were a nightmare made flesh, bent on destruction, and it seemed to me that they were converging on the borders between their universe and ours. Nor were they the only beings that made my skin crawl. There were others, many others, from amorphous blobs of pure hate through to AIs like Shell, but distinctly unfriendly. And a multitude of things that defied description. It was eye-opening, terrifying, and it seemed utterly hopeless. How could our universe, which up until then I'd never thought of as fragile, hope to survive against such ongoing hostility? Yet for some reason I also felt hope, had a sense of determination to do something about it. And then everything changed. Instead of showing the mysteries of the universe, the hologram showed something else. For lack of a better word, call them spells. Written words described with associated gestures, and each one I focused on displayed a holographic image of the old man performing them. I watched the old man mumble a spell that made an apple rot in an instant, then return it to full health. Another showed him opening a rift in time and stepping through. Still another, and he seemed to be imbuing small devices with weaponized time. It was fascinating, and I would have liked to see more, but all too soon the images faded. The old man began talking.
"So, now you understand," he said, sounding very sober. "I'm doing all I can to keep those things you saw from breaching the walls between their own universe and this one, all along the timelines. But it's become harder with every encounter. You saw what happened to me in the forest. I'm weakening, and I don't know why, Caleb. My ability to fight them is becoming restricted, and I don't know for how much longer my efforts will suffice."
Despite the doom and gloom of his words, the old wizard managed to grin.
"But that's where you and the ladies come in."
It was a lot to accept. My mind was whirling like a galaxy around a supermassive black hole. I get it. My ability to work with time. Time bending. You've got something similar, right? But more developed. That's why you need me. You think I could help. But why are you dragging April and June into this mess? Let them go home.
The twins don't know it yet, but they are important as well. They are augmenters.
As the old man spoke, April approached from the main room.
What?
She asked. She smelled like fresh flowers and clean water. Her wet hair hung over her shoulder, and she was wrapped in a sheer linen she had found somewhere. The blonde had wrapped it around several times, though, obscuring any nudity. A drop of water fell out of her hair and trailed down her shoulder, disappearing beneath the folds of fabric. I tried not to follow it with my gaze, but I only partially succeeded. Think of something else, I told myself. I was as horny as a teenager discovering porn for the first time.
An augmenter, the wizard answered, completely unruffled. Someone who aids Caleb with his powers. You noticed he could slow down time? Well, his ability improved when you were near, especially after you decided to help him.
It did? From my perspective, it had barely worked at all, at least as far as the bug demons were concerned. And yet, it had certainly felt easier when April joined the fight.
I helped him how? She asked.
How indeed?
The wizard grinned his dirty grin again as he looked at me.
Simply put, you and those like you give Caleb strength. The closer you become to each other, the more your powers are enhanced. You will gain strength just like he does.
So, he really could hear me?
April said thoughtfully.
I wanted to talk to him so badly.
I nodded. I heard you speak to me, April, inside my head. Have you always been able to do that? She shook her head.
Tonight was the first time, really. But I've always felt like it was possible. I wonder what June will think of this.
I thought about the dark-haired sister. She doesn't like me much, does she? I asked. April flashed me her smile.
She likes you fine. You did save us, after all. It's him she doesn't like.
She pointed to the wizard. The old man just grinned.
June. She'll come around soon. Give her a little reason to love you, Caleb, and she will.
I wasn't entirely comfortable with the wizard's familiarity, so I changed the subject. Back at the club, you already knew about my talent, didn't you? And you knew I'd be there. How?
That's one question I can't answer today. You'll have to figure it out on your own.
Why not just tell me? I asked. The wizard shrugged.
I don't want to.
Infuriating old man, I thought to myself.
Caleb,
April said.
June and I are finished, and you stink.
You really do, the wizard chimed in. Why not let April help you off with your clothes?
No way, she said. I just got clean.
Too bad, the old man said. Caleb should have joined you two in the bath, then you would all be clean at the same time. Not to mention the pool is there for community bathing, and all sorts of fun things can happen when you're in the steaming water, splashing each other, touching.
Enough, I said. I swear the old wizard really did like to push limits. I can take off my own damn clothes. I acted annoyed, and I was, but April's words contained an element of hope. Her objection to the old man's suggestion had been based not on wanting to get dirty again. Of course, maybe she was just being polite, but I couldn't help but think that maybe she wouldn't have minded in other circumstances. As I shed my clothing and limped into the hot water, I remembered the glimpse I'd had of April and June's bodies in here moments before. I grunted, annoyed once again. If I were in my own apartment, I could have let my mind wander and my body respond. Here, with April, June, the wizard, and Shell as audience, I needed to keep my thoughts on something more boring. I focused on the way the water poured over the marble basin and into the pool. The gentle waves rocked me, and before I had finished washing, I was almost too tired to stand. I did anyways and turned my attention to my clothes. My jacket had been with me for years. It was padded and a little unusual, but it had served me well. Now it and my pants were disgusting, covered in drying bug guts. Even my shirt hadn't escaped the carnage, so I grabbed one of the folded linens near the bath, just like the girls had, and wrapped it firmly around my waist. It looked like I was wearing a skirt to my ankles, but at least I was covered. When I joined the girls, they were arguing with the wizard.
Why can't you just have more beds?
April asked. I've been aware of the conversation for some time as I bathed, but hadn't paid attention to it until now.
Because you and Caleb need to get to know one another, the old man responded just as blithely as ever.
Why, so you can watch?
June demanded. The wizard chuckled, but he didn't really deny it.
I'll just sleep in the cockpit. If anything happens to, happen tonight, don't you worry about me. I'll seal myself in and won't know a thing.
Look, I interrupted. It's a big enough bed for the twins. I'll pile some of these curtains on the floor and sleep there. I shrugged. I've had worse beds.
Nonsense,
April said, eyeing my bare chest before looking into my eyes.
You must be exhausted after the fight.
She bit her lower lip for just a moment, then turned away, her cheeks slightly flushed.
The bed is plenty big enough. Sleep at the foot?
June elbowed her, and April turned to her sister.
Why should Caleb have to sleep on the cold marble floor just because the old man is too perverted to give us all our own beds? He's a decent guy. You know it as well as I do.
June looked at me. Hi, I waved. Decent guy here. I just want a good night's rest, I said, even though that wasn't strictly true. After all, both of the girls were absolutely stunning. Only a dead man would have felt no desire for either of them. The dark-haired sister sighed.
If you talk in your sleep, I'm kicking you out of the bed.
I've never talked in my sleep, ever, I said.
He doesn't snore either, the wizard said. In fact, he's a perfect sleeper. One you can cuddle and hold, and do naughty things to all through the night.
Enough, you're not helping, I said, and then muttered, What is wrong with you? June didn't look completely sold, but she didn't argue anymore, and within a few minutes the three of us had settled into the massive bed. I was curled up at the girl's feet like a puppy, and while I had mixed feelings about that, it felt good to relax into the soft mattress. At first, my mind whirled with everything that had happened, combined with the nearness of the twins. But soon I forgot about everything and fell into a deep, comfortable sleep. Chapter 12. I woke up to someone's icy foot in the small of my back. Wincing, I sat up and tried to remember where I was. The Greek palace looked the same as the night before, only dawn was just breaking over the distant hills visible out the window. I had rolled out of my makeshift linen skirt sometime during the night, and it was completely entangled beneath the girls, leaving me completely naked. April was the one who had woken me with her foot, which stuck out beneath the gossamer sheets. The sleeping form of her naked body could have been that of a goddess. One breast was exposed, the nipple taut in the cool air. June lay beside her, her dark hair spread out over her pillow in a sexy cascade. Turning away, I went to look for something with which to hide my erection. I hadn't woken up next to a woman in some time, never two at once, and never anyone this hot. The pile of linens beside the pool had disappeared, as had my clothes. Since they had been there last night, I could only assume the wizard had stolen them. Of course, he wasn't anywhere to be seen. Damn it, old man, I grumbled. Who did he think he was? Some ancient, disreputable Cupid wannabe? April stirred, and I put both my hands in front of my crotch, but that was only a temporary solution at best. Behind the curtains draping the bath, I grabbed one to yank it down, but it proved remarkably resistant to my efforts.
What are you doing?
April asked. She rose and draped herself with her own linen with the grace of a goddess, but didn't bother to do much wrapping. Overnight, her hair had dried into waves that fell down over her bare shoulders. I gulped and covered my crotch again. April smiled, a bit wickedly, I might add, as she walked over.
Did you lose something?
She said, her eyes drifting over my body. The way she looked at me set my body on fire. The wizard stole my clothes, I said by way of explanation.
Good. They were putrid and needed to be burned. Do you want mine?
April pulled the corner of the linen wrapping away from her body as if she were going to disrobe right there. The smile on her face was teasing, but there was enough of a challenge to it that I thought she might actually mean it. Was I dreaming? I gaped at her, wishing this were happening, but not daring to hope. If it was a dream, though, then I could relax a little, right? Before I could come up with an answer, April hesitated. She grew serious.
what the wizard said last night about us getting closer. Do you think it's true? Will our gifts, your thing with time, my telepathy, will they grow?
My lips had gone dry. Now wasn't a good time to talk about the wizard. It was the last thing I wanted to think about. I don't know. He's crazy, but somehow I think he's telling the truth. At least, I think he believes it's true. April nodded.
I believe him too, I think. But I can't explain why.
Me neither. My voice was husky with need. Did April know how badly she was teasing me? Her linen wrapping barely covered her right breast, and it exposed one thigh up to the hip. I'm naked, I stated fuzzily as all the blood rushed to my groin. April giggled softly.
I know.
Can we talk about this maybe later? I said as she moved closer. Hell, she must have known the power she had over me. The evidence was barely concealed by my hands, which I didn't dare move. She gazed into my eyes and put a hand on my shoulder.
Thank you for saving us last night, she whispered.
I breathed heavily, mentally fighting for control of my body.
Couldn't have done it without you. Thanks for fighting with me. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. And the sexiest.
My last words lingered in the air between us. April stood on her tiptoes to kiss me on the lips. It began softly, but then she wrapped her arms around me and deepened it. Soon I moved my hands to her waist, feeling the thin fabric covering her warm skin. Her breasts pressed against my chest. Our tongues danced around as we explored each other's mouths. She pushed her hips against mine, and I knew she felt my hard cock as I grabbed her ass and pulled her closer. My erection pressed into her firm abs, and I lifted her so it pressed instead between her legs. Fuck, she was hot, I thought. And when my hand found the gap between the folds of fabric and touched her bare ass, she gasped.
Caleb,
she moaned. It almost made me come right there. I was hot, turned on, and needy. There was only one bed, and June was still sleeping in it. I fantasized for an instant about waking her up and crawling in with both girls, but then decided one was more than enough, at least for now.
Where? I croaked out. The bath.
I didn't need to be told twice and lifted April completely. She wrapped her legs around my waist as I stepped into the warm water. The cloth between us got soaked, and we laughed quietly as we tried to untangle it from around our legs. Once it floated away, April stood there with water up to her waist. This time I didn't hide my appreciation for her perfect breasts, cupping them with my hands and kneading her nipples with my thumbs. April arched her head back and smiled.
Perfect,
she said, echoing my thoughts. Her hands found mine, and she urged me to continue. Smiling, I ducked my head and took one pert nipple in my mouth, sweeping my tongue over the soft skin. I wrapped my arm around her waist and pulled her closer. The end of her hair dipped in the water as she bent backward. The motion reminded me of the dance moves I'd seen her perform on stage and made me wonder how flexible she really was. Maybe I'd get a chance to find out. Sucking on one nipple, I waited until the areola was softened and grew, before moving over to the other breast, teasing it with my tongue, my teeth. April began to moan appreciatively, and her breathing became more ragged. I'd never seen a woman respond so well to having her breasts kissed, and I found that I liked it. If possible, I became even harder.
Don't stop, Caleb,
she said into my mind. I could get used to having her inside my head. She wrapped her legs around me again, the soft lips of her entrance tantalizingly close to my dick. And still I kissed her, swirling my tongue over her, tasting her, pinching one nipple while I essentially made love to the other. April was leaning all the way back in the water now, half floating, half supported by me. And she came. Her face scrunched up and her mouth opened in a silent "oh" as her body shuddered with her orgasm. I supported her for a moment, letting her calm down, Oh, I whispered.
That's never happened before,
April said, still breathing hard and smiling as I set her down in the water. She got her feet under her and leaned against me shakily.
I didn't know I could do that.
I smirked, more than pleased. Any other skills you want to share? April kissed my chest.
Au contraire. It was your skill that was shared, Caleb.
She winked and kissed my lips.
But I'll be happy to find out if either of us has more to offer.
Her nipples were red and swollen from my ministrations, and thinking about her orgasm from that made me proud. My cock was so hard now my balls hurt, and the thought of moving things further only intensified the sweet torture. But before we could move on to part 2, June shouted from across the room. "What the hell are you doing?" Chapter 13. Naturally, I thought June was yelling at us. "Shit," I muttered, but April looked confused. The next moment, it became clear June had a different target for her outrage. The wizard had returned from who knows where, and I could see that he was stark naked even through the curtain. I couldn't believe it. He really was a big pervert. At first, I thought he had something sordid in mind, and I sprang into action. But 2 steps out of the bath, I realized something wasn't right. The wizard wasn't intent on anything vile. He was just wandering about, apparently oblivious to his own nakedness and not even looking June's way. "Damn it, put some clothes on," June yelled. The wizard glanced down at his body, but then just shrugged as if it didn't matter. To me, his shriveled body looked like a pale white raisin, all wrinkles and saggy skin. His junk dangled down way farther than I thought possible. I mean, he was old, I knew that, but I hadn't taken him seriously when he'd said he'd been alive for millennia. It looked like all those years had taken a toll on his body, and especially his, private areas. Averting my eyes, I looked around for something to cover the man with. The wizard hadn't paid much attention to June, but when he saw me, he smiled mischievously. "See what you have to look forward to?" he said. I raised my eyebrows. "Huh?" The wizard nodded his head, glanced down at himself, and grinned.
"You are certifiable,"
April said from behind me. She had wrapped herself in the wet sheet, but this time it was tied tightly, hiding her beautiful body. June finally took notice of me. Naked, remember, and her mouth dropped open. She pulled the covers over her own body and scrambled out of bed.
"What the fuck? Is everyone around here crazy? There are too many naked people in this room."
My hands went back to my crotch, and I eased over to the bed while June moved away. "I just need something to cover up with," I explained. "Take it easy." That was the wrong thing to say. June's eyes practically blazed, and I felt hot anger radiating off her in waves.
"I'll take it easy," she said, "when everyone in this damn magic van gets some clothes on."
The wizard didn't seem to take June seriously. He looked me up and down and raised his hands to his mouth in a gesture of mock shock. "Oh my," he said, channeling George Takei, and I could hear the grin in his tone. "What on earth is going on here?" "We could ask you the same thing," I muttered, finally grabbing one of the sheets off the bed and wrapping it around my waist. After seeing the old man's wrinkly private bits, my own steamy thoughts had cooled considerably. The wizard surveyed the room one last time in all his glory. Then he nodded to himself as if all was right in the world and marched over to a wooden chest I hadn't noticed before. Maybe Shell had conjured it in the night. Either way, he began searching through it. He tossed out random items of clothing, a t-shirt, jeans, a lacy bra and thong, a dress, some others. April tiptoed over and grabbed some of it.
"This is the top I was wearing last night."
She tentatively held it up to her nose.
"Smells like laundry detergent instead of bug guts."
The wizard continued tossing clothes onto the floor until he found a set of robes, which then he pulled over his head, fighting with them as they got tangled in his long hair. I picked up the t-shirt and jeans, and they smelled fresher than they ever had before. I thought these would have to be burned. Even my jacket was back to its best. June and April hurriedly gathered their clothing and retreated to a corner to get dressed. Since at this point everyone had seen me naked, I didn't try to hide while I put on my jeans. I couldn't find my underwear, so I had to go commando. Not my first choice. There isn't a pair of boxers in there, is there? I asked the wizard, who had just managed to tie a belt around his waist to secure his robes. I pulled everything out, he said. Then he chuckled. Get it? I get it, I muttered as I pulled my t-shirt over my head. How did you clean these? Shell did it, said the wizard. If you ever need clean clothes, just pop them into that chest and she'll take care of it. What are we supposed to wear in the meantime? I asked. The wizard winked. I'm sure you'll think of something. From the far corner, one of the twins giggled. Since June hadn't been in a good mood only 2 minutes ago, it must have been April. Had she told June what had happened? My thoughts returned to the bath, and I glanced back at it longingly. Too bad our tryst had been cut short. Although I did think it a bit weird that June had effectively been in the same room. I never had sex without being behind a closed door before. I did have sex in a car once. The night before I had left for basic, I'd taken my then-girlfriend up to one of the few drive-in movie theaters still operating. We'd parked under the only tree in the lot, away from the other cars, and made love. It was the closest I'd gotten to having sex in public. Don't remember the name of the movie, but the car was a 1974 Dodge Challenger I'd restored. That was a great ride. The car and the girl. And to buy the Challenger, even as a junker, I'd saved every penny from mowing lawns, shoveling snow in the winter, and various other jobs in my teenage years. Once we were all fully clothed, I expected the Greek palace to transform back into the van, but that wasn't the case. We don't need to transform to move, the wizard explained. We're just going to land a palace outside the Good Times Club? June asked. She crossed her arms over her chest. It pushed up her boobs, and I tried to avert my eyes before she caught me staring. My dear June, said the wizard, we are not going anywhere right at the moment. Shell has a problem. What problem? Shell asked, her metallic feminine voice carrying a hint of confusion. The wizard just glared at the glowing AI, which was hanging near the driver's capsule. Oh, yes, she said. A problem. So many things to keep track of, what with the incursions and the timeline shifting. Speaking of timelines, we've got another alternate universe spinning up. Before we can fix it, however, I need you to go to the museum down the road. They have an artifact on display that happens to be a part I need to repair the van. There's a museum down the road? April asked. Did we just happen to land where you knew you could get a part you needed to fix a problem you didn't have yet? I smiled. April was surprisingly sharp, and I could hear the open suspicion in her voice. Nor was she the only one. June, wearing a deeply troubled look on her face, went to stand beside her twin, and I moved to join them. June glared at me for a moment, then seemed to accept my presence. Anyone else feel like they're just being used to hunt these bug demons? The dark-haired twin asked. I told you that last night, June, the wizard said from directly behind us. Startled, she and I both jumped. He poked his head between our shoulders and grinned his usual grin. Are you always this rude? June asked. Only when the fate of the universe is in our hands, my dear. He offered June his elbow as if to escort her outside. Chapter 14. The dark-haired twin crossed her arms over her chest again, causing her breasts to lift upward and her cleavage to spill out of her dress. And damn if I wasn't getting hard again. This isn't the time, I thought. June's breasts were just as perfect as April's. This combined with her dark hair, dark lashes, and bright eyes. June looked like a sultry seductress from the underworld. I felt like a jerk for getting a hard-on for June when I had just been with April in the bath, but the whole situation was weird. And even though I didn't know June as well as April, I still felt we shared a connection as well. Or maybe that was no more than lust. Pleasuring April had awakened my appetite, and I was having a hard time focusing on the conversation.
Now, if Caleb here can stop oogling June's boobs for just a moment or two, the wizard said, bringing me back to reality, I'll explain what we are going to do.
I did my best to ignore that he'd just outed my oogling. Didn't Shell just do that? I thought we were going to the museum to get a part, I said. The wizard blinked at me.
Do you think the guards will just let us go on a shopping trip as if we just arrived at a dollar store? We need a plan of attack.
Before we get into that, Shell interrupted, might I suggest that Caleb and April check their stats? I believe they leveled up this morning.
April stared wide-eyed at the floating AI. June frowned.
Leveled up? What do you mean?
She asked. But the wizard cocked an eyebrow.
This morning, eh?
He said, grinning like the lecherous old goat he was and punching my arm.
That's the spirit, Caleb. We never did beat around the bush with these things, did we?
Don't touch me, I said, and I don't know what you're talking about.
The bath,
Shell explained.
Caleb and April were intimate in the bath, and since orgasm was achieved, their powers were enhanced.
More stats popped up in holographic form in front of my face. It wasn't what I was interested in just then, so I waved my hand through them as if I could shoo them away. Yet I couldn't help notice a couple of changes. My time-bending skill rating had improved to a 2, and that odd augmenters category now read Augmenters 2 times 1.5 augmentation. I didn't see April's stats, but figured they would show a similar improvement. What the hell, Shell? I asked. Were you watching?
Orgasm, huh?
June said, casting a knowing glance at April.
I don't have to watch, the AI said. Because obviously I do not have eyes. But I felt an orgasm since you were in my bathwater. The bathwater lets you feel when people orgasm?
April asked.
That's a bit creepy.
There's nothing sexual about Shell,
the wizard said casually. He opened the outside door, letting a salty sea breeze enter the room.
But she's more than just a floating device you see here. She's everything, in fact. And if she can sense disruptions in the timeline, why shouldn't she be able to sense the vibrations of an orgasm?
The vibrations of a... I began, feeling my cheeks redden. Could Shell feel my erection too? Or is it just the climax? Like April said, it was creepy.
Of course, you didn't achieve penetration,
Shell added, not helpfully.
When you do, it will double your powers.
Wait, I said. That makes it sound like... Oh, what do I care? I said, shaking my head.
Orgasm, huh?
June repeated, looking at April. The blonde twin glanced at me and grinned.
You can't blame me, can you?
It was then that the wizard decided he'd indulged us long enough.
Are you coming?
He asked with his most lascivious grin.
Or was that earlier?
Before anyone could respond, he grabbed my arm and ushered me out the door. I was blinking in the bright sunshine before I knew it. He must have enjoyed the joke because he repeated it.
Coming, girls?
He said, giggling. He tried to goad me toward a stone pathway, but I stood my ground and waited for April and June. None of us had actually agreed to help. The sisters looked at each other. Perhaps April said something telepathically. If she did, I didn't hear it, but after a moment, June nodded.
Okay, she said, if we must.
The wizard's grin grew broader.
Oh, you must. Absolutely, he said blithely. The entire universe depends on it.
It didn't do much to endear him to anyone, and the girls grudgingly joined us outside. But then it wasn't like we had another option. If we didn't help, we would just be stranded in the middle of who knew where.
Right then,
the old man said as we began walking.
When we get to the museum, there's an ancient artifact we're looking for.
What sort of artifact? I asked.
A tribal pendant from the Amazon. I'll know it when I see it.
Fantastic, I muttered. The stone path soon joined a road, and we walked a short couple of miles into a small city. It looked modern.
I thought you said we were in 1954,
April said.
No, that was back at the forest, the wizard said. Now we're in 2005, not long before the recession that hit the United States and Europe.
Stunned, I stopped walking, and April collided with me. I would have been a young teenager, still living with my parents. No, wait, maybe not. My father was already dead by then. Where are we? I asked. The wizard grinned.
We're in Greece, of course. But there's been an incursion in the museum. Sometimes the minor demons will latch on to residual space-time disturbances caused by keeping so many artifacts from different times in the same room. Museums are time traps, if you will, for these little buggers to wreak havoc. We'll need to root this one out before we can move on. Right, so here's the plan.
June grabbed the wizard's shoulder to stop him.
You told us we needed a part for the van.
And we do,
the wizard said, gently removing her hand.
But it's in the museum where a minor demon has taken up residence. Now, if you're done... damn.
He was fading again. This time, the hand holding June disappeared, followed by his arms and ribcage. Inconveniently, his robes vanished as well, and we were left staring at two wrinkly, hairy legs, his junk, again, and his face. April closed her eyes and shook her head with a grimace. She looked like she was trying to dislodge the picture from her mind. I didn't blame her. I felt like I needed to bleach my own mind.
Listen quickly, I don't have much time, the wizard said. The pendant will hang in the Amazon exhibit. You'll know it because of the time dilation surrounding it.
Huh? The what? I asked.
You'll sense it, Caleb. Work together, get the pendant, and try to lure the minor demon away from any crowds. With any luck, that monster is hiding in storage and hasn't yet figured out there are easy meals walking the halls.
Absolutely not, June said. We're not fighting another one of those things. April almost got killed last time.
It wasn't that close,
April said defiantly. Despite her tone, her face had paled. What do we do? I asked. The wizard's toes had disappeared as well. Considering what was left, I wish the rest of them would go too.
Work together, he repeated. It's the only way you can get home. Oh, and don't let anyone know you're from another time. That's very important.
And then, for the second time, he vanished.
Fuck,
June said. I agreed. Chapter 15. The museum was easy to find. All we had to do was follow the signs, which usefully were both in Greek and English. Part of me was admittedly excited for this mission. Call me crazy, but I liked the idea of saving the universe. It was a refreshing change from being a bouncer in a seedy nightclub where all I had to worry about was the occasional obnoxious drunk. The museum was free admission, so we waltzed in, catching a few stares. Mostly April and June did, but the only place they'd fail to draw more than their fair share of attention would be at a convention for the blind. Individually, they were stunning. Together, they could stop traffic at the Indianapolis 500. We quickly found the Amazon exhibit. It was fashioned to look like an artificially lit jungle. Behind glass cases, all manner of spoons, bowls, and necklaces were displayed with tiny cards written in Greek announcing what they were. None of them looked like a pendant, nor did anything jump out at me as being something that would help fix a time-traveling van. I was starting to worry that we'd been sent on a wild goose chase when April paused.
Is this it?
She asked, pointing at a beaded necklace with a circle carved out of bone hanging at the end. The wizard had been right. I sensed something emanating from the pendant. Time seemed to move around it in waves, and I wondered if the vibrations were similar to those Shell had felt when April orgasmed. Stop it, I thought to myself. We were in a public place with a possible monster on the loose. I needed to focus on what we were doing. Yeah, that's it, I said. How do we get it? June asked. I wonder if either of you thought of that before we embarked on this great adventure. She sounded sullen and grouchy. April answered the underlying issue instead of June's actual question.
I want to go home as much as you do, she said. I'm just ready to help us get there.
June didn't seem satisfied. She shook her head and muttered, Fucking ridiculous. April turned to me with a smile.
I'm sorry about my sister's foul language, she said, tossing her blonde hair. She's always been a potty mouth.
I don't mind a dirty mouth, I remarked without thinking. The twins looked at me. April raised an interested eyebrow. I mean, I said, in the Marines, I heard much worse than that on a daily basis. In case you hadn't noticed, what comes out of my mouth isn't always language you'd want your grandmother to hear. June offered a snort.
Who do you think taught us to swear? She said. We were raised by our grandmother, April explained. Although I would like to know more about your dirty mouth, Caleb, and what comes in your mouth.
My jeans instantly became uncomfortably tight, and since I was commando, there wasn't much to hide the bulge growing down there. I turned toward the glass and whispered, I said what comes out of my mouth. April smiled.
I know what you said.
My gaze drifted down to April's breasts, and the memory of the morning flooded back. We really did need to go home, and I hoped when we did, April would come over and spend some more time with me. June cleared her throat.
For fuck's sakes. We're going to die while you two stand there eyeing each other. Flirt later.
Yes, ma'am, I said, grinning. So, we never came up with an answer to how we were going to get that pendant.
Really, Caleb?
June asked, with a hint of both sarcasm and humor.
You have no idea.
I thought about it for a moment. Oh, I said. I guess you mean my talent. April nodded in agreement.
That might work. Seems like all you need to do is slow everything down, go in there to get it, and come back out. If anyone's watching, it'll be like the pendant just disappeared.
Made sense to me. I looked around to see how the display area could be accessed. Not through the front, obviously. Somehow the museum staff must have accessed it through some sort of access corridor at the back. Does anyone see how to get in behind it? I asked. We looked, and 3 displays down, we found a door hidden behind some fake vines and trees. Locked, I said after trying the handle.